Hello, Scott Hebner here. Welcome to the new Next Frontiers of AI podcast, where we're going to be partnering with a network of industry experts and pioneers to explore the latest developments shaping the future of AI and how you can prepare now rather than later. It's our view here at theCUBE Research that 2025 will represent a year of game-changing advancements in AI for business. In this episode, we're going to preview some of those advancements and provide our top 6 predictions for 2025 when it comes to AI. And to help me do this and to have a actually critical discussion on these predictions is Tim Sanders, who is the VP of Research Insights at G2. My thinking here was, look, I could have done a podcast and just talked through the predictions, but let's pull in Tim, who really understands what's happening out in the world of AI and agentic AI, particularly as we go into this year. And I thought it'd be good as we step through the 6 predictions to get some commentary on it. And Tim's promised to be honest and critical. It's okay to be negative on the points of view, or maybe it's going to happen in 2026, 2027, or maybe never. That is fun. I think, that's going to be the fun of all this, is the have a discussion on it. And I think almost everyone in the industry can agree that the year 2025 will represent the rise of agentic AI. But what does that really mean? And what are the underlying changes, especially from a technological change, that are going to occur? And that's where I've anchored the 6 predictions I'm going to go through. I'm going to punt on the big Uber one, which is agentic AI. This assumes that that's going to be the movement of the year as we transition from 2.5 years of focus on generative AI. So Tim, welcome. Thank you for taking some time to do this. Maybe a quick intro for everybody, and then we'll jump into the predictions.
Excited to be with you, Scott. Like you mentioned, I lead the Research Insights group at G2. My laser focus is artificial intelligence. And so I'm excited to talk to you, especially about not only agentic AI as an overarching theme, but how the worm is turning from the generative AI economy to the agentic economy. I'd also just say in passing too that in my work as executive fellow at Harvard Business School, I'm exposed to a lot of other thinking too, from an academic point of view about AI, and I hope to incorporate that in this conversation as well.
That's fantastic. Okay, so let's go on to prediction number 1. Which is that LLMs alone will run out of gas to fuel enterprise ROI. So we just went through, Tim, as you just mentioned, 3 years, let's say, certainly 2 years of an industry focus on generative AI. The data shows some 70% of businesses have deployed at least one generative AI use case. They're all underpinned by these LLMs. They're using it to analyze information, automate tasks, perhaps to make some predictions or create content. It's been all about individual productivity. And the technology is amazing, right? It is incredible feat to be able to do some of the things that generative AI can do. But the truth of the matter is, when you start asking business leaders about ROI, DataQ actually had a recent survey that said only 20%, actually it was 18%, so about 1/5 said that it has given them a high impact in terms of ROI. So it's really just the first step in a longer journey for AI in business. And my prediction here is that as we move on to the world of agentic AI, which moves from a task orientation to how do I achieve a goal, which includes decision intelligence, problem solving, planning, these LLMs are simply going to run out of gas, right? Why? Because they're correlative in nature, right? They swim in massive data lakes, and they basically spit out, without really knowing what they're being asked or what the answer is, some kind of outcome through statistical probabilities and all the technologies on the covers, basically being correlation based. However, a couple of problems with that, which I think is going to limit its ability to generate ROI in the future, is first of all, correlation does not imply causation, right? Which can lead to hallucinations and and inaccuracies. A prediction is not a judgment, so it's going to struggle a little bit on decision making.
Yeah.
And it certainly doesn't adapt well to changing conditions. Basically, it operates in a static world from learnings of from the past data, right? So all those things don't do well when you're looking to move into the world of decision intelligence. And therefore, LLMs will have to be complemented by an ecosystem of more specialized models to actually be able to achieve agentic AI. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I agree with you generally. Do want to talk about the first assumption here. The first assumption around hallucinations, there's a lot of data, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things I've seen in the last year that is game changing is the implementation of retrieval augmentation, vector-based RAG. So the idea here, Scott, is that we've seen that when it comes to getting an accurate answer from a large language model, context is king, not training. It's sort of like parenting, right? You can overtrain a kid and they lose all their creativity, but if you're really rich with context and storytelling, they tend to be breakout geniuses. And I just made that up, but I believe that from my own personal experience. I've found a way to dramatically increase the accuracy, reduce the hallucinations this year by providing more and more context. Classic example, working on something today, Scott, where I wanted to draw a neat link between Henry Ford's analysis on some of his radical efficiencies and DeepSeek. And not only did I make sure that my LLM partner only looked at a data set I showed it, I also made sure as it wrote anything, it only looked at transcripts of my own videos from a style guidance standpoint. Now, that being said, the problem here is that we in enterprise cannot tolerate any mistakes from a machine. So when we hear about something that's enterprise grade, that means that it's got to have a near perfect level of accuracy. LLMs won't have that, and they won't internally have that decision intelligence to challenge themselves to the level to take away all my need for context providing. And that leads to the second idea here. So you talked about return on investment. Here's my reaction. I think the problem has been that there's a delivery problem between personal productivity gains and organizational velocity. The CFOs aren't seeing headcount reductions, just outside of a few use cases, and they're definitely not seeing increased output. So that's a real problem. Upwork did a survey last year, blows my mind. Did you know that 2 out of 3 leaders say that generative AI actually decreases their productivity because of how much they have to manage it going into production? So I get you, LLMs without something better on top, like decision intelligence, like planning capabilities, by themselves will not be enterprise grade. They're a boon for small business owners, though, I would say that. And here's the other reaction I have. You talk about the idea that prediction isn't judgment. And wow, you're right. One of my favorite books that taught me this, if we'll put this chart up here, was the book Prediction Machines. Scott, that's the group, the Rotman Mafia, as we like to call them, up at the Creative Destruction Lab. And they talked about the idea that for the first time in history, AI decoupled prediction from judgment, which disrupts the concept of the expert and all of their decisions made based on years of expertise, where they made a prediction, they passed judgment, they did it at the same time. Of course they did. They had the context to do such a thing. The idea behind the book, and that's it for this chart, was that the machines would make the prediction, but the human still passes judgment. And I think that's really important to understand. LLMs don't replace the expert by themselves. What LLMs do is they put a new burden on us to pass more judgment. The real leap here that's coming, and to some extent here for certain use cases, is this concept of reward engineering, where the machine increasingly will understand how to pass rudimentary judgment so much that we let it take actions, and we solve that CFO's delivery problem, where we get a neat tracking of the capability of the tool and the actual velocity of its impact to the organization. But I agree with you. LLMs alone will not be enterprise grade. There needs to be something on top.
Right. No, I think everything you just went through makes a ton of sense, and I think is right on. I just add 3 things here, and then we'll move on to the next prediction. One part of the challenge here is that does it really understand what you're asking it, right? And Apple had actually recently done a study of all the major LLMs and generative AI solutions, and we started asking it more goal-based, more nebulous kind of questions, with ambiguity in it.
Yeah.
And you kind of change the phrases, or you ask the question in a different way, or you replace some parts of it. There was a 65% inaccuracy rate.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It even has a hard time understanding. And like you said, which is right on, is that a prediction is not a judgment. To make business critical decisions, you have to make judgments, and therefore you start to see limitations of it right there. And again, we'll get into this, I think, as we go through the conversation here. But just because you can correlate something that an LLM doesn't mean that causation. And therefore, by equating those, creates an incubator of problems, right? So
you do. One thing I caution though here, Scott, is that people should still spend as much time as they can with an LLM. And CEOs, I'm talking to you. This is literally Gladwell's 10,000-hour rule, because one thing I've learned is that power users of AI in general, Scott, power users that get their hands on a keyboard are going to leapfrog everybody else who's just delegating that to someone else. So get your hands dirty. It's just not enterprise grade. So you have to figure out that demarcation line for your own business.
Yeah, we both emphasize the word alone. I think LLMs and generative AI have set a very clear foundation. It's how you build around it and above it to complement it and to address its limitations. So
I heard a data scientist yesterday said something to me. He said, Tim, LLMs are like steam, but we're waiting on electricity. And I got to go sit with that idea. I love that.
Yeah, I think that's right on. So we move on to the next phase that builds upon the last phase. All right, let's move on to the second prediction. And you'll see these are kind of wired together into a thought process here. But the second prediction we have is that AI reasoning gets democratized for all in 2025. Thought a lot about this. Is this really a 2026 prediction? I'm going for it in 2025 because there are literally hundreds of vendors today out there that, including the big guys, that are all have in their research divisions a lot of activity going on around actual reasoning. When I say reasoning, I'm talking about chain of thought, right? Where you decompose a prompt or a problem into steps, and it revisits it, and it just does a better job of thinking aloud, right? And it learns from its actions and human input. That's step one. Step two is semantic reasoning, which is more about meaning and context, the relationships between entities. It starts to give you a semantic understanding, which is the foundation for reasoning. The third layer of that is causal AI, right? The ability to understand consequences and the ability for AI to understand how and why a certain approach is better than another, right? So the idea of causal mechanisms or cause and effect. And then thirdly is when you start wiring agents together, you're going to get this, effectively the notion of swarm intelligence, where they learn from each other and they delegate different parts where they have specialty and they collectively
system of agents.
System of agents. So that's all going to be built upon generative AI and LLMs and RAG and all that kind of stuff as the foundation. And it's nice that the technology exists, but you have to be an elite AI engineer or data scientist to apply it today. What is great about what's going on out there is many, many, many vendors are now creating very, I won't say easy to use, but productive environments that are going to democratize the ability for everyday businesses to apply these kind of techniques in their own AI development. And I think that's going to become an accelerating market in 2025. Thoughts?
Well, this one, no debate at all. First of all, everything's running ahead of schedule. We should have learned that in 2016 when DeepMind's AlphaGo crushed Lisa Dell. Like everybody was like, it's 10 years away. It happened. It's going to keep happening. So this year, what does democratization mean though, Scott? That's what I think about. So it's like, it's democratized with respect to, can you afford it? Can you have access to it, right? So what's interesting to me is that, getting back to this enterprise conversation, even though reasoning has become democratized, the paranoia level from CTO to CISO is still at a point where the obstacle of distrust will still keep it an arm's length away. I really see mid-market and SMB making incredible leaps this year, especially in high-risk environments like fintech and health tech, especially where people have the fear and paranoia runs the highest. So I think enterprise, from a cost standpoint, it's democratized. They got to get out of their own way on these trust gaps that I think will define the future of leadership. And I know we're going to talk about explainability. That's a real problem. But here's the thing. Think about this week, Scott. It's like I couldn't sleep last night because I just couldn't put my laptop down reading DeepSeek updates from every social angle I've ever thought of. We want open source to win. We want there to be a cloud kind of capability built into AI that democratized startups, over a decade ago. So while I agree with you that democratization from an economic standpoint will happen this year because of disruptions like DeepSeek, because of things like O3, which I think for $200 a month will be a steal. I think all of that's great, but what I worry about is enterprise having a newfound vulnerability to being a bit hard by ankle biters because they can't get over the emotional blockage of trust gaps. We don't trust the machine. That's 99% effective, but we will continue to employ an idiot who's only 75% effective because he reminds us of somebody we knew in high school. And I'm not kidding when I say that.
Yeah. Well, I think, right on again. And, democratization, I think, as you just pointed out, does mean affordability. And it means it goes from the elite class to everyday businesses being able to use it. And, the experts I talk to that are in the middle of all this reasoning stuff, they'll tell you that, what's under the covers of generative AI and LLMs is unbelievably complex.
It's unbelievably
This
complex.
reasoning stuff takes it to a whole new level of complexity.
Right.
And
right.
that's what these software platforms and tools are going to do, is it's going to shield all that and democratize it. And therefore, I think we're going to see it used in a much more broad-based way. So
I think the key here, Scott, is let's watch advances in interface accessibility, right? So like, if we think about like when I got involved in internet, like 1993, 1994, Netscape Mosaic, like it changed the game because any person with any level of technical expertise could find things. 1991, 1992, Archie, Gopher, remember those Northern Lights? Pointcast, it used to run overnight. It was a thing to actually find information on the web, and then the interfaces change it. So to your point, let's watch this. Let's watch that application layer. It's going to be the great comeback of UX UI, even though we all know AI is a UX UI revolution in and of itself, but I think that's coming too. That's part of it.
We'll see. We'll see. My view of the reasoning is that it's not only necessary, but it's inevitable. And I think the big question is it a massive movement in 2025 or 2026? I'm going to go for 2025.
It may be parts. It may be parts because reasoning, not to try to because I'm not an engineer, but I play one on TV. Reasoning, to me is a combination of being able to break a thing down in tasks and then conduct planning and then make critical decisions of directional actions and then, of course, take them based on all of the above. Maybe this year we're going to see AI get really good at taskification and begin its journey on planning. So it might be components, but I do believe reasoning, as we talk about it in general sense, will become more accessible this year. Right on that one.
I mean, it could be as simple as doing knowledge graphs on top of your LLMs. It is very incremental. It's not rip and replace. And so it's going to be hard to measure, I think. But I think the key thing, which goes back to number one prediction, is that LLMs alone, they're going to have to be complemented, whether it's by a knowledge graph or a causal model or whatever. And that's what we'll be watching this year. The next one, I think you've already said enough where I think we're going to agree. So prediction number 3 is that AI explainability emerges as the currency of innovation. So let me kind of explain what I mean by that. I think there's ample evidence out there in surveys and just talking to businesses that they're slowing down deployments of AI, especially in use cases that involve business critical decision making. It's one thing to try to enhance productivity of workers. It's another whole thing when you get into business critical actions, decisions.
Exactly.
Right. And unless the explainability can be addressed, it's going to slow down deployment of these type of solutions, including agents. And why? Trust, right? There's already a trust issue with generative AI. It's going to become even more intense when you have real decisions being made. And even if you go full steam ahead with autonomous actions within, an agentic system, do these agents, do these models understand consequences of their actions? Can they explain how and why they derived this particular approach or outcome, and allow you to interrogate it to really understand it? That's going to enhance trust. And more importantly, I think actually in the near term, is allow the people using AI to adhere to corporate policy and regulatory compliance challenges across the world. If those issues aren't addressed, then the investment in higher value, higher ROI use cases is not going to be there. Therefore, the more explainability, the more you can invest in innovation, and therefore it becomes the currency for innovation.
This is a complicated one, I have to be honest with you. Now, full disclosure, I'm an effective acceleration fan. So I find, a lot of discussions on AI safety and explainability when they're just those conversations a little bit of a drag on innovation. However, that being said, I believe that effective explainability is a big deal because it addresses what I just mentioned earlier, this trust gap, right? Because to me, the biggest issue is how do we get human beings, especially ones from older generations like mine or even the Xers, how do we get them to trust machines even relatively as close as they trust human beings? That's a huge thing that stands in our way. And it's a mental mapping model. It goes back to scary movies. I'll give you an example, Scott. I was sitting with my literary agent. We were talking about my next book, and I won't do her accent because she's offended. It's New York. She says, "Darling, did you see this movie? We watched it in Colorado recently. It was about this nanny that came in, and she was an AI, and she took over the family, and they got a divorce, and all these terrible things." I'm like, "Oh, you mean like an au pair? That happened 5,000 times with human beings last year, but nobody talks about that." We have this deep set distrust of AI that is so profound. But I believe, Scott, is explainability will have two categories. Rote explainability, like think of it as the DEI application of explainability. All right, I've done it. It's like when you have a prescription drug ad on TV, they speak 100 miles an hour with all the complications. That's rote explainability, okay? And then there will be effective explainability, which is storytelling, which is analogy making, which is metaphor employment. If you want to be good at explainability, you have to go read books like Nancy Duarte's Resonate to figure out how to solve that trust issue. So while explainability is a currency, I think the rise of effective explainers will be a talent explosion next year. And I think it's going to be a great opportunity for a lot of people, because I think that's the issue here. So if I were to look at this trend, I would say solving trust gaps continues to be paramount, but I think explainability is a big part of that.
Yeah, and again, this links us back to the number one prediction, right? Today's LLMs and generative AIs simply cannot explain how they derived an outcome. And for some of the solutions that are out there where there's fixes to it, it's still only predicting what it thinks is how it came up with the outcome. So you still go back to the same issue, right?
Yeah. You go back to the same thing. One of the things I just saw, really developing in the conversations yesterday around DeepSeek, Scott, that's relevant here is chain of thought.
Yep.
So, you see a lot of commentary, even amongst consumer users, not just data scientists, like, yeah, DeepSeek's taking a little longer than I'm used to, but it's explaining to me what it's doing. And I'm okay with waiting because I feel like I've finally been let in, that chain of thought. I think it's paramount that we begin to employ more and more of that. And I think even as we continue to use LLMs while we wait, in our prompts, we need to say, help, give me the logic that you're using. I just did that today on a formula on efficiency, and it broke down the math for me, and it allowed me to point at it and go, that's wrong. And that was really helpful to me when we finally got an answer that I actually think I can use it in the video and be confident that it's right. So I think that's a big piece of that too. Chain of thought's a big deal.
And that links back to, number two on the reasoning, right? Because chain of thought will start to give you a logical sequence of how it went about solving a problem. On the other end of the spectrum, when you get into the world of causality, you can then understand the precise chain of events that led to an outcome, and not only understand what the chain of events were, but you'll be able to understand what the influence of each link in the chain had. And you can do counterfactual reasoning with it to say, well, what happens if I change this? And so again, this is a spectrum, and this goes back to one of our other conversations about the gradient, if you remember that, right? It's not going to be rip and replace. It's not an agent is this and an assistant is that, but it's going to be a gradient of capabilities. And I think that's absolutely true with explainability.
I tell you one more thing. When we figure out explainability, it will be the greatest disruption to senior experts in the world, because you want to talk about somebody who's opaque, who becomes offended if you want them to reveal their chain of thought, an expert. So I think that's incredibly disruptive if we figure it out.
Yeah. And again, that's why it's the currency of innovation, in my view. And I think this year will be a year where I think there's going to be a ton of advancements in explainability. And if not, you're going to see a slowdown in deployments, particularly in agents and agentic AI, because if you're going to make decisions, you've got to be able to explain the decision. Otherwise, no one's going to try. All right. Well, that brings us to number 4. And this goes back into history, right? That if you think about what's going on with generative AI today, is it going to meet the same fate as the browser wars in the early internet age? And essentially, my prediction is, yes, it is. And this is going to be the year that starts, where just like the browsers dominated the discourse, right? And it was such a critical decision.
Netscape.
Netscape versus this versus
Kicked
that.
off the IPO thing. Yeah,
it was the most critical decision, right? And it wasn't very long before it really wasn't a decision. All the innovation that flowed around it and on top of it and through it became where the ROI and the innovation came from. And the browsers just became part of the infrastructure that you get, right? And at best, it's a preference, right?
Yeah.
I think Gen AI and the Gen AI wars that we've been accustomed to over the last couple of years is going to meet the same fate. And it doesn't mean that it's not critically important, and that it's not amazing stuff, and that the amount of investment, putting that all aside, I think it's just a matter of time before it becomes part of the foundation, integrated into cloud and AI platforms. And it's just part of the infrastructure, and all the discourse and the investment in the ROI will come by extending and building on top of that. It will no longer be the center of the investment world in business for AI.
Yeah. I love it. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that Andrew Ng yesterday talked about, something in this discussion. I keep going back to it because yesterday was such a vibrant day. He said, look, we've learned something. The application layer is where it's at. It's not the foundation layer. And he's right. And this is the point you're making about browsers. I mean, let me ask you something. Where's Netscape? How about Internet Explorer? My gosh, how much was poured into that? At the end of the day, browsers became a media business. The only real thing you got out of it was serving media, and that is a terrible multiple from an investor standpoint. I believe, Scott, that generative AI will just end up being a compute arbitrage business in the future, picks, shovels, and bits, and it in and of itself will be a very difficult business to raise money for when we get over this hype cycle that we're in right now around it. But I think it'll be an important part of the underlying foundations. But even for those generative AI companies, and I'm looking at you, Anthropic, OpenAI, et cetera, they're going to have to either enter or become a real participant in the application layer, just like AWS and Google Cloud has done with the cloud economy. So I agree with you. Browsers were great. There was a lot of them. There's been a lot of reduction. We only use a few right now, and none of them really are standalone businesses.
Right. I think that's right. So we'll see what happens here, but I think it's a pretty good bet.
Right on that one. I agree.
Yeah. And as we're thinking through the predictions, there were 2 uber thoughts here. Actually 3. One was that I'm going to punt on agentic AI because I think that's consensus, right? The second thought was that there's going to be rapid innovation, and the innovation cycles for every one of these transformative technologies over the last 30 years is speeding up. So it's time to move on to the next level. And I think that's very much going to happen here. And that was sort of what we've been talking about in the first 4 predictions. The third big thought I had was around talent, right? I think
I'm thinking a lot about that too.
Yeah, talent is a big deal. And I think it's going to become even a bigger deal in 2025. So let's kind of jump into that one with number 5. And this one is, I've done a lot of conversations of recent with the software developers and app dev experts. And it's becoming increasingly clear to me that software developers are going to become data scientists. And if you don't, your value
exactly
stagnate. Yep. Let's just say stagnate. And what I mean by become data scientists is exactly what it says, data science, but also being able to build AI applications and AI models and things of that nature. And I think what's going to help make that happen is a new wave of AI agents and agentic systems that actually are designed to help build applications that inherently involve AI and AI models and all the different things that we were talking about today. So software developers don't, as we increasingly move into the forward, into the time here in 2025, are not necessarily going to have to go back and get retrained or go to school. They're going to be able to adopt these new agents to become coworkers, and it's going to effectively turn them into data scientists. So are you a software developer? Are you a data scientist? Are you an AI engineer? It fuses increasingly as time goes by here. And I think 2025 will be a year where there's just an onslaught of software developers that are actually able to do data science work.
Yeah, and they have to. I mean, even when we think about this most radical thing that happened, with DeepSeek getting a 93% efficiency gain in inference, for example, they went back to first principles. One of the most compelling things I heard yesterday was the concept that OpenAI versus DeepSeek is like engineers versus data scientists. Science always wins in the long run. Why? Because it's radically focused on the process, not the product. And so I think that this idea that those that were formerly from an engineering mindset need to become data scientists, it's really about embracing first principles, learning how to challenge all best practices, learning how to burn it down and start over again from a thought process. I think data science is a mentality as much as it is a vocation or an educational focus. So that's one way, Scott, I think it's going to change. But I think there's a couple of other changes we have to pay attention to. So that's a use case, that's software, but there's other use cases that are emerging quickly. Customer service with agentic is going to be an easy use case for adoption because the pain and the technical debt is so great in those customer service organizations. We're going to see copywriting, we're going to see image creation, we're going to see a variety of use cases that obliterate years and years of talent, skills, acquisitions. What is that talent going to do? That talent is going to need to move upstream into driving the AI systems instead of performing the AI deliverables. One of the things I've begun to look at is where does the real displacement occur in, say, 2026, 2027? And what I found is the most ripe area for destruction in the labor market is contractors and freelancers. Why is that the case? Their biggest employers, enterprise organizations, had to taskify all their work so that it could fit neatly through procurement workflows. Well, that's going to be an easy one. The full-time employees, that's going to be harder because of the optics and all of the intangible work they have to do across decisions. But freelancing, contracting, temps, all of that, I see massive disruption in. And I speak from experience. I was the VP of Client Strategy at Upwork for 5 years before joining G2. So I know this space, and that's my thesis.
Yeah, I think again, your insights are right on and makes sense to me. And in terms of software developers becoming data scientists, the studies I've been reading, about 60% or so of software developers use AI assistants to help generate code and test cases and QA and all that stuff. That's very different than being able to actually build, data science models and AI applications and things of that nature.
That's right.
And
that's right.
That's down around 20% of software developers today. Conversely, by the way, only about 20% of data scientists can actually, build software, develop software. I think that's going to
I think so. And you make a good point. So, I cover a lot in private equity, and I found that the teams, the operating partners that go into, say, a software company that they buy, the first thing they're going to be looking at is that CTO covering model innovation? Do they consider the model strategy as the existential decision that is followed by the data strategy and finally followed by software and applications? Or are they software application focused? Because if they are, we're going to lose. So they're going in right now looking, is that CTO a data scientist or are they a logistics manager? That's going to be a really important distinction. So for those of you watching out there that want to be leaders of technology, learning how to not only understand, explain, build, modify. There's so much open source. You can do it starting today. That is going to be the #1 way you improve your employability and your career equity over the next few years.
Yep. And again, I think it's going to be the first, not the first, but it's going to be a major use case for agents. Because,
Yep.
Again, these developers are, most of which are accustomed to task-oriented AI, like, the code generators, things of that nature. We get into agentic, you get into goals and planning. That's what's going to allow software developers to more easily become data scientists, because it's going
That's right.
to abstract all the complexity on the covers. And I think we'll see that 20% number grow as we go through 2025. All right, that brings us to the last prediction here, which kind of builds on this one, which is AI talent augmentation. It's just going to become inevitable. Couple angles on this, and this is one of the areas I've been, spending a lot of time on. I've done a research note on this in the past, back in October, I think it was. Today, there's about a 2.3 times gap in supply and demand for those businesses doing job postings and trying to hire versus the supply of people that can meet those skills. The Boston Consulting Group just came out with a study that showed 67% of businesses are struggling to find the AI talent that they need. You add to that a couple other key points, which is that if you look at universities, it's a 4.4 times gap in supply and demand, meaning they have more people trying to apply into an AI-oriented education than the universities in the United States can handle. So that kind of implies that there's no real help on the way in the near term. And then finally, the market is paying a premium for AI engineers, AI architects. Over 50% of businesses or people that work at businesses are saying that they may move to another company to get higher pay because they're in such demand. So businesses are not only struggling to find talent, they're at risk of losing the talent they have. The only way this is going to get resolved in certainly 2025 is going to be to augment your talent. And there are, again, a ton of companies out there that specialize in AI talent augmentation. And it could be by hour, it could be remote, it could be on-site, it can be team-based, it can be outsourcing. These businesses are doing incredibly well, more than double-digit growth from what I'm witnessing here. You add to that these agents, right? So there are companies out there that are doing, basically data science agents, which will turn a business analyst into a data scientist and an AI engineer. And the bar will not be as high to build AI applications. So the augmentation comes by going to other companies and essentially acquiring and augmenting your talent in a flexible way, plus agents augmenting the talent. And I think that's become a big trend in 2025.
I think in 2025, that's the trend, but the worm will turn again in 2026. And the sharp inflation that we're going to see in the contractor freelancer space for these particular skill sets will be at a point where it's running pretty even to the inflation we're seeing for full-time hires in the same categories. There won't be as much of a shortage of people as much as capital to hire those people. So I think there'll be a lot of pressure for digital labor to become a real thing and to look more for one-to-one substitutions. And what I want to do, and I just want to show something here, I think, to give some context here, because I think it's interesting. I want to say that if you look forward a few years, Scott, I know we're only talking about 2025, you're going to have organizations that still have kind of a traditional structure where, say, 85, 90% of the outputs come from human capital, and then 10% will come from digital labor. But there's a new company coming, a new type of company coming. And this company will have a massive layer, maybe 30, 40, 50% of their outputs coming from digital labor and a much smaller amount of it coming from modern. What's striking about this graphic, Scott, is that on the right, not only is it more agile, it's bigger. And so when you think of this intelligence capability, the horsepower equivalent of brain power, really figuring out a way to make digital labor part of our dashboard view of our workforce planning. That's the secret to building a bigger army with the same amount of money that just can't lose.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing to watch what happens over the years to come. And I think 2025, if we go to the final view here of just all these predictions, I mean, the 6 of them, I think if you were to kind of net it out here, fall into 3 core categories. One is we're going to be moving on from generative AI and LLMs as the center of focus. And it's going to be about building on top of them and extending them with ecosystems of models that get architected to work together. You're going to see talent become an increasingly big issue that companies are just going to have to address through augmentation to be able to keep up with all the rapid innovations, right? And to keep up with their competition. And then thirdly is, and you hit on this a few times, trust is going to become even more important as we get into the world of decision making and problem solving and autonomous actions, which is very, very different than automating tasks. It's, automating a task is a lot less risky than making business critical decisions. And particularly if you're going to have an agent go off and do one, autonomously. And so trust, talent, and a year of rapid advancement, particularly around explainability and reasoning and decision intelligence. It's going to be a game-changing year, I think, for the industry, and where customers have to, start really thinking about how they're going to go about staying prepared, because these cycles are going so quick now that what's generative AI was the center of focus for 2 years, and we're now moving on to the next topic.
It's from chess to go. That's where we're heading. And, if you're watching this, you should feel a profound urgency to gather theoretical and practical knowledge about artificial intelligence. You should be looking at it like going to the gym. If you're not getting your hands dirty and talking about it 4 to 6 hours a week, you're going to get really behind.
Yeah.
Strap up. It's
transformative, on steroids, I think, compared to the last many cycles of
good times. I love it.
Yeah. All right, Tim. Well, thank you very, very much. I appreciate you taking the time. This has been a great conversation. I will be putting out a research note that goes into much more detail on the rationale behind these predictions. And thank you very much for taking your time and joining us today. We will continue to keep you up to date with more research and analyst views and guests as we move forward through time here on SiliconANGLE and theCUBE Research. And again, thank you very much. We are the leader in news and analysis. Bye for now.